Have you ever noticed something strange about people? Some people don't argue, they don't fight, and they never really explain anything. One day, they're just gone. No goodbye, no dramatic conversation, just silence. And the strange part is this. Most of the time, the people who disappear like that are the ones who cared the most. So what actually happens to someone like that? Why would a person who once gave everything suddenly cut everyone off? Most of us have met someone like this at some point in our lives. They're not the loud ones. They're not the dramatic ones either. They don't slam doors or announce their exit. Instead, they slowly grow quieter. They reply a little less often. They stop showing up to the same gatherings. And then one day, you suddenly realize something. You haven't heard from them in months. From the outside, that kind of disappearance can feel confusing. Sometimes it even feels cold. But the truth is usually something very different. Because people who leave like this are rarely the ones who give up easily. In fact, they're often the ones who stay the longest. Most people don't walk away because of one big moment. It rarely happens like that. Instead, it starts with small things. A moment when you felt like no one was really listening. A time when you needed support, but nobody noticed. A conversation where you smiled and said everything was fine, even though it wasn't. At first, you ignore it. You tell yourself you're probably overthinking. You remind yourself that everyone is busy, but those small moments don't disappear. They repeat. And slowly, something inside you begins to shift. Not because you suddenly hate the people around you, but because you're starting to feel tired, emotionally tired. And here's something interesting. The people who eventually cut everyone off are often the same people who used to give the most. They were the dependable one, the friend people called late at night when things fell apart, the person who listened to everyone's problems, the one who tried to help fix situations that weren't even theirs to fix. In many ways, they became the emotional support system for everyone around them. But there's something most people never notice. When someone is always the one supporting others, very few people stop to ask a simple question. Who is supporting them? And over time, constantly being strong for everyone else can slowly drain a person. Not suddenly, but little by little. Eventually, something begins to change. They stop answering messages as quickly. They decline invitations. They start spending more time alone. And strangely enough, they begin to feel lighter. Their phone becomes quieter. There's less pressure to respond to everyone, fewer conversations that leave them emotionally exhausted. And sometimes, that quiet feeling is the first time in a long while that they finally feel peaceful, which can be surprising. Because we're often taught that being alone means something is wrong, but that isn't always true. Sometimes silence isn't loneliness. Sometimes silence is relief. We often assume that distancing ourselves from people must be unhealthy, but sometimes distance is simply a form of protection. If stepping away from someone makes you feel calmer or lighter, it may mean you were carrying too much in that relationship. Some relationships survive only because one person keeps holding everything together. And when that person finally stops trying, everything falls apart. Not because they stopped caring, but because they can't carry the weight anymore. But here's the part people don't usually see. Walking away is rarely easy. Even when someone feels relief, there's often sadness underneath it. Because when someone cuts off a relationship, they're not just leaving a person behind, they're also leaving behind the future they once imagined with that person. The friendship they hoped would grow stronger, the connection they believed could become healthier. Letting go of that hope can be incredibly difficult. After someone creates distance from many people, life often becomes quieter. There are fewer emotionally draining conversations, less pressure to constantly show up for everyone, and in that quiet space, something interesting begins to happen. People start rediscovering parts of themselves. They realize what they actually enjoy, what they truly need, and what kind of relationships make them feel safe. Sometimes walking away from certain people is not the end of a story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a completely different chapter. People who run off are not always cold. They're not always distant. Often, they're simply people who spent too long putting everyone else's needs before their own, and eventually they reach a quiet realization. If they keep living this way, they will slowly lose themselves. So they create distance. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally started caring about themselves too. If you've ever walked away from many people in your life and wondered whether something was wrong with you, there probably wasn't. You may have simply learned something that many people take years to understand. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. And growing up isn't always about keeping everyone around. Sometimes growing up means learning who truly deserves to stay.